This is Channel 5 Action News with Sam Nolinsky and David Propora.
Breaking news. Francesco Redi just possibly disproved the long-held theory of spontaneous generation put forward by the sagacious Aristotle.
Spontaneous regeneration, also known as abiogenesis, is the theory that living things could be produced from non-living matter. Examples of this would be maggots forming from rotting meat or flies forming from manure.
Now, it seems ridiculous to believe this doesn't happen, especially in this enlightened year of 1668. I mean, come on, where else would flies and maggots come from? But this man just may have disproved it.
Francesco Redi is a noticeable scientist and physician, so his theory can't be simply thrown away.
He has designed this experiment to disprove spontaneous regeneration by placing fresh meat into two different jars. He left one of the jars open and the other he covered with a cloth.
After a few days, he checked the jars and found that the open jar contained maggots, while the cover jar did not, at least not inside. Maggots were found on the surface of the jar, of the cloth that covered the jar.
The scientific community is not entirely convinced by Redi, who says that maggots come from fly eggs, not from rotting meat.
Around 70 years ago, we reported that the scientist Francesco Redi may have disproved spontaneous regeneration.
Now, 70 years later, John Needham, a respectable English scientist, set out to prove him wrong, and has possibly done so.
John Needham designed an experiment by placing broth, or as you common folk know it, gravy, into a bottle. He then proceeded to heat the bottle to kill everything inside, then proceeded to seal it.
When he checked it days later, he reported finding the presence of life in the broth. He announced that life had been made from non-life and that he had proved spontaneous regeneration.
The opponents of this spontaneous regeneration theory, which has been increasingly losing support, ridiculed Needham, saying that he made the amateur mistake of simply not heating the bottle long enough, thus letting many of the microbes live.
Lazzaro Spallanzani, an Italian scientist and also ironically a Catholic priest, decided to review the work of scientists Francesco Redi and John Needham. He recently tried to disprove the work of John Needham, and he believed, like many, that Needham did not kill everything in his experiment.
He decided to construct his own experiment in vein of both Needham's work as well as Redi's work.
Instead of one container of broth like Needham's, he used two containers and boiled the broth inside like Needham. Unlike Needham, Spallanzani managed to not make the rookie mistake of not heating it long enough to kill everything.
Spallanzani then proceeded to seal one of the containers and have the other one open. When he checked days later, the open container was full of life, while the sealed container was void of any life.
The results of Spallanzani's experiment was similar to Redi's results, thus showing that spontaneous regeneration was not a feasible theory. Spallanzani's critics, however, believe that by sealing the container too tight, Spallanzani deprived the bottle of oxygen, which they believed is a necessary component of the spontaneous regeneration. A French chemist and microbiologist named Louis Pasteur, quite famous among the scientific community for his work on crystallography, as well as for his pretty awesome beard, got fed up with those who still believed in spontaneous regeneration and decided to finally put the question to rest. His experiment was only recently finished.
He found solutions to the flaws of the experiment of the previous scientist to attempt to disprove spontaneous regeneration, Lazzaro Spallanzani, by using bottles with swan-like S-curved necks to allow in air. He oriented the necks of the bottles downward to stop the possibility that airborne agents might enter.
He used a nutrient-enhanced broth to increase the likelihood of life. It indeed was possible in one of the bottles, and then proceeded to boil it to kill off any bacteria. He then waited a whole year. What remarkable patience, and then observed no life forms in the bottle.
He then proceeded to break off the top of the bottle, thus allowing bacteria to freely enter, and life forms appeared in the broth within days. He noticed that dust and other particles were trapped in the neck of the bottle, an obstacle to life forms that may contaminate the broth.
Louis Pasteur was finally convinced the world that the notion of life coming from non-life is an absurd misconception.
And you may have noticed recently, longtime viewers of our show may know that even after 200 years of reporting, we haven't aged a single day. We have decided to reveal our secret. Eat your vegetables.
I still look awesome. I'm David Propora.
And I'm Sam Nolinsky, signing off.
This is Channel 5 Action News. You stay classy, Wauwatosa.